I rise on behalf of the opposition as the lead speaker on the Assisted Reproductive Technology and Surrogacy Bill 2025, noting that this is a matter of conscience for our party. At the outset, I want to acknowledge that this debate contains elements that are very personal for many people. I'd like to thank members for their courage in sharing their own personal stories. By sharing stories, we grow in compassion for what others are going through. We learn more about other people's circumstances, and it helps us to remember that we all deserve dignity and respect as human beings. When we talk about the loss of a child in the womb, there are so many people who are experiencing loss and grief. Today is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Remembrance Day. I have walked beside too many loved ones in their grief, and so I respectfully acknowledge the grief and loss experienced by many and the lifelong impact that that has on so many people's lives. I also acknowledge the pain and the suffering that many people face on journeys of infertility, the strain it can have on relationships and the harm that people can suffer. The concerns that I raise today are in no way minimising that harm or suffering. But the bill before us is substantial and lengthy. It has 369 clauses, 214 pages. It is very complex. It combines multiple legal matters that are quite contentious: surrogacy, posthumous removal of gametes, and assisted reproductive technology. One of the concerns that I hope will be raised in detail during consideration in detail is around the area of assisted reproductive technology. We have heard multiple cases recently, from the eastern states in particular, of scandals of mixed up genetic material, errors made in that space. So it's important that we ensure that the concerns raised by people who've been affected in those situations are addressed in this bill. But it's quite clear that there are three main groups of people who are significantly affected by this legislation. There are intended parents, a surrogate mother, and a baby in each of these situations. And my great concerns with this legislation are around the removal of legal protections. We've heard a lot of debate around the removal of legal barriers to surrogacy, but the bill that stands before us also removes critical protections for some of our most vulnerable. At the heart of a decision around surrogacy, there are two major decisions: a decision to have a baby and a decision to give that baby to someone else. I will focus on the ramifications of this and speak specifically about our duty as legislators to weigh up the risks and benefits of the law that we are considering today. One mechanism under our current law that protects women who wish to be surrogates is that they are required to have already had a baby. Why? Having a baby is a completely life-changing experience, one with great joy, but it also comes with risks, complications, and potential long-term negative health impacts. I'd like to go through this today in a fair amount of detail, because having a baby is not anywhere near the same sort of decision as choosing to have a drink or choosing to vote, as some people have compared it to when they look at the age that we're considering at which women can make a decision to be a surrogate. There are 4 different stages that I'll go through around having a baby. They are pregnancy, labour, childbirth and post-birth. And I want to address and raise concerns around some of the risks and complications in each of those areas. Deputy President, today my comments will continue on from some of the comments of other members. I will speak about some of my own insights from my own personal experience as a mother, and also taking from the experiences of close friends and family. I'm a mother of 3 and my oldest is 10. I was 25 years old when my first baby was born. And pregnancy is a bit like a roller coaster. Every ride is different. Some of my friends are quite lucky. They tell me that for them it was simply like a walk in the park. I contrast that with others who've had more like a long, hard trek up a mountain, through a forest and a jungle with some sunshine but plenty of rain. Pregnancy has an emotional impact and, importantly, a physical impact. And this is not something that we can predict. It is not something that we can guarantee anyone can avoid, and it has a significant impact on a woman's life. Let's start with morning sickness, which is one of the most common symptoms in pregnancy. And for me, it was immediate. With my first child, within weeks, I started to feel nauseous, a bit like feeling seasick. But whoever called it morning sickness certainly played somewhat of a cruel joke. It's not just happening in the morning. It can last all day, every day, with nausea and vomiting. And no 2 pregnancies are alike, even for the same woman. So for me, I had 4 months of morning sickness with my first child, 5 months of morning sickness with my second, and 6 months with my third. One of my great friends commented that if I keep having babies, I'll end up being morning sick the whole time, which is not an enjoyable prospect. But in all seriousness, I have friends who have gone through that experience. I have friends who've been bedridden and hospitalised during their pregnancy, who have conditions such as hyperemus gravidarum. A good friend of mine is over 5 months pregnant, and she is so unwell that she cannot stand for more than 10 minutes without feeling dizzy, and she cannot drive without vomiting. Earlier on in our debate, there was an interjection from the Honourable Jackie Jarvis about how women can still work while pregnant. And for many women, that is the case. But you can't guarantee it. It's not something that we can control. No one can predict it, and it can have a serious physical impact. Other symptoms in pregnancy that are very common. And I'm going through these today because these are things that we are asking young women to consent to, particularly young women who may have no idea what this impact will have on their lives. As well as nausea and vomiting, many women experience reflux and heartburn, constipation, hemorrhoids, fatigue, thrush, back and pelvic pain. While these are not rare complications, they have a huge physical toll. Like many, I had very low iron, borderline anemic, requiring iron infusions. Insomnia is also a very common symptom in pregnancy, which is pretty cruel as well, considering you're trying to get as much sleep as possible before a baby arrives. Leg cramps, brain fog, less energy. For women that have other children, it's much harder to look after and care for your other children. A woman's entire physiology changes in pregnancy. Her blood volume will increase by up to 50%. The heart and lungs adapt. The kidneys actually clear medication more rapidly, which actually means that common medications can become ineffective or dangerous, so all prescriptions have to be reconsidered. Members here have already spoken on the stresses of IVF and the toll it can take on individuals. This stress and toll is also borne by women who are volunteering to be surrogates. Pregnancy has many lifestyle and social impacts as well. Daily life is also restricted in a lot of ways that are not much fun, such as pregnant women are required to abstain from alcohol, avoid high-risk foods such as cold meat, soft cheeses, raw egg products, and face limits on long-haul travel because of deep vein thrombosis risks. There's also a huge time commitment involved in all of the appointments, the GP appointments, the blood tests, the scans, and requirements to take leave if a woman is working for those appointments. Some sports and other activities become off limits because of risks, and there are social impacts as well. Pregnancy also often involves a roller coaster of emotions. Many a loving spouse or partner has had their head bitten off for the smallest infractions by a very emotional woman. And I can still laugh about how some of the, even just watching some advertisements could make me cry while I was pregnant, because there are all of these hormonal changes. Estrogen and progesterone alter skin. They cause conditions such as melasma and linea nigra. Relaxin is produced, which loosens ligaments, and that actually increases the risk of injury in everyday activities. But the risks get more serious. Gestational diabetes is common and rising, and it's also linked to preeclampsia, more cases of caesarean birth, and neonatal complications. The gestational diabetes test is bad enough, let alone having to deal with the consequences if you actually have the condition. Pelvic pain throughout pregnancy can be excruciating. About 50% of women will experience lower back pain or pelvic girdle pain, and 25% of them will still experience pain up to a year after delivery. This is associated with negative impacts and repercussions on sleep, social and sexual life, physical and work capacity, and psychological health. There are even more serious risks of pregnancy complications, placenta previa, risks of ectopic pregnancy, and some complications are so severe that a woman will never be able to have more children. So if she doesn't already have kids, then we're asking her to consent to potentially never having her own children, which is just not fair. In Australia, the premature birth rate is about 8.4%. And tragically, 1 in 4 pregnancies will end in miscarriage. I have journeyed alongside friends and family who have lost babies, and the trauma and suffering, often in silence, is heartbreaking. Grief and loss are very difficult for us to deal with, and I acknowledge the loss of all those who have lost a child. We are asking women to agree to these risks. We are asking them to consent without potentially providing them with the information and the understanding, the knowledge for them to be able to give informed consent. No two pregnancies are alike, and no one can predict what their pregnancy journey will look like. The closest protection we have to making sure that women understand what they are agreeing to is to ensure that a woman cannot be a surrogate unless she already has given birth to a child. Is it really fair to expect women who have never had a baby to understand the ramifications it will have on their life? Our current law protects women. Unlike most other parts of Australia where this protection is still in place, this bill removes that protection. Do we really aspire for the first experience of motherhood for our women, for the first experience of pregnancy, to be one where a woman is giving up the child? Moving on to the next stage of having a baby, and I'd like to go into some of the risks and complications associated with labour. And interestingly, labour can supposedly last for 12 to 24 hours, though I've heard many stories from women where they've spent days in labour. I was 25 years old when I had my first baby, and I was diagnosed with gestational thrombocytopenia, which is a condition in which platelet levels are incredibly low, and that has risks and complications around potential blood loss in different circumstances, particularly highly risky during birth. It's actually more common a condition than I realised. About 10% of women who are pregnant will have this condition. But before I even go into talking further about labour, when I was diagnosed with this condition, I was told that I would need to be induced. I went through stretch and sweep, which I think you should Google if you don't know what that is. It's more painful than Google tells you. And then a few days later, I was induced on a Monday evening. Labour began, my contractions began, and in the morning my waters were broken, something else to Google if you have a strong stomach. Now, I spent the day in labour experiencing increasingly painful labour pains. They're very difficult to describe. I do believe that there are experiments you can sign up to where you actually experience a simulation of labour pain. So maybe we should consider how informed consent could be if women experience what labour pain is like before they agree to be a surrogate. But regardless, I do want to try and describe what labour pain is like, and I won't use my own words. I will turn to some of the words of women who've put their stories up online, and I will just grab that here. The first result when I researched what does labour pain really feel like, these are some stories, comments that I will share from the first article that popped up. Samantha said, "It felt like my spine had been grasped by pliers and was slowly being pulled out of my body." Annette said it was like someone inside my stomach was stabbing me from the inside out. Shelley said, "From the early twinges in your lower abdomen and back to the racking, body-breaking, almost at delivery mega cramps, I feel like I've been hit by a train. It felt like a living nightmare," says Marie. And Michelle says, and this is not my words, I promise, "Your body feels like it's trying to contort itself to an inside-out position whilst at the same time running an ultra-marathon at full sprint, in bare feet, in water, with electrical power lines down all over the place. Every contraction progressively worsens. It is like electrical wires were connected to every friggin' single nerve cell firing at full power all at once." Regardless of what any woman's labour experience is like, you can't know in advance, and you can't guarantee that it won't have long-term health impacts and ramifications. When we talk about childbirth, thankfully we live in a country where the risks, mortality risks are low, but there are still risks and complications. In my experience, after a day and a half of labour, my first birth experience was quite harrowing. In the early evening, my obstetrician, during a routine check, informed my husband and I that our baby was showing signs of distress. There was concerns that our baby was struggling to breathe, that he wasn't getting enough oxygen. I can't describe how stressful that was, particularly as I'd been in labour for so long and was completely exhausted. He recommended an emergency caesarean, and preparation began immediately. I'm incredibly grateful to my obstetrician and all the medical staff who did such an incredible job in safely helping us with the delivery of my baby. Having major surgery, particularly after being in labour all day, is incredibly challenging. Having a caesarean is debilitating. It's difficult to lift your baby afterwards, it's hard to feed them. You can't drive for weeks, you can't swim for weeks, there's risks of infection. And figures from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare show that our rates of C-sections are very high in Australia relative to other places in the world. In 2022, around a third of women giving birth for the first time had a C-section, and the rates are generally higher for surrogate women. Caesarean section is one of the most common interventions in pregnancy and is safer now than in the past, but there is still a small risk of morbidity and mortality for both the mother and the baby. Childbirth is incredibly joyous, but more often than not, it is not without a huge amount of stress, pain, and long-term negative effects. I do have plenty of friends who joke that they would never have agreed to have a baby if they knew what they would have to go through. And these risks, complications, and side effects cannot be known in advance, they cannot be controlled, they cannot be consented to. Childbirth carries lasting consequences. In 2021, 5% of first-time mothers giving birth vaginally experienced a third or fourth degree tear. These are injuries that can leave women with permanent incontinence and chronic pain. And of course, the greatest risk in childbirth is for the death of a child or a mother. While thankfully in Australia our rates of death during childbirth are declining, there is still a risk. In 2022, 21 women were reported to have died during pregnancy or within 42 days of the end of their pregnancy. Women aged under 20 have the highest maternal mortality rate. And the tragic cases of any women who die during childbirth, whether surrogates or not, are a reminder that the risk is real and it's concerning that it is higher for our younger women. Then finally, the baby has arrived. Modern medicine recognises the importance of close physical contact between the mother and a newborn child after the birth for the well-being of a child. And I will talk about this in a bit more detail later. But one of the other risks for a surrogate is that they may end up holding the baby. There are several cases, even just recently, where intended parents have changed their minds, and these are the words of the women affected. Thankfully, in these two cases, the women were in a situation where they were happy to continue to keep the baby and raise the baby as their own. But here are the words of one woman. I agreed to be a surrogate to help a couple who dreamed of becoming parents. For 9 months, I carried their baby, went through all the ups and downs of pregnancy, and prepared for the moment I'd hand their child to them. But when the day finally came, they never showed up. No calls, no messages, no parents waiting to take their baby home. I was left holding this tiny, perfect little human, realising that the life I thought I was just borrowing suddenly became my reality. What started as a gift for someone else turned into the most unexpected journey of my life. And now that baby is my whole world. But another surrogate is in a very difficult position. She asked for feedback online and guidance on what she should do. I'm a surrogate mother. I helped a very rich couple birth a baby. Something happened and they got divorced after birthing the child. Neither of them wanted the child anymore. She says she was left with the baby as both parents abandoned her and refused to pay any money towards the little girl's care. She struggled but got by for a year, raising the child herself, and understandably they have become bonded to each other. But then the parents came back. The couple is back together after a year and they want their child, she continued. I love her so much, I can't let her go. What should I do? There are other risks, complications, and negative long-term effects that women face after birth. One such risk, which is highly common for any woman who's had a baby, is that of postnatal depression. Australian research indicates that depression is experienced by up to 1 in 10 women during pregnancy and 1 in 7 women in the year following their birth. The rates of anxiety orders are likely to be even higher, and many women are likely to experience both depression and anxiety disorders concurrently. We have grave concerns around the mental harm that women face, and there are other long-term medical implications after birth. Some of those health conditions that women deal with include painful sexual intercourse, affecting more than a third of postpartum women, lower back pain, incontinence, anxiety, depression, perineal pain, fear of childbirth, and secondary infertility. As some of the lawyers working in this space for surrogates rightly advise, a surrogate is risking her life and limb in these situations. For the reason alone that these risks, complications, side effects, long-term negative impacts cannot be predicted, controlled, or properly consented to, that is sufficient reason for us to be referring this bill to a committee for an inquiry, which I will do later on this evening. We need to look at doing this because there is no justification for the removal of the protection for a woman that she already have given birth to a baby, held a newborn baby in her arms, and understand what that feels like before she enters into a surrogacy arrangement. We're also lowering the age, whereas around the world there are many other jurisdictions that have much higher ages. There are some that are outlawing surrogacy completely. And around Australia, many other jurisdictions still retain that a minimum age should be 25. What is the reason for this protection? It's because we understand that there may be situations where young women are vulnerable and are exploited and taken advantage of and coerced into becoming surrogates. There is no good reason to reduce this age down to 18, particularly when we consider that schoolgirls could be approached to be surrogates. We have schoolgirls who are 18, and do we really want them to be put in that position? I'll also flag that I've put an amendment on the notice paper to reintroduce this pivotal protection, that we reintroduce the requirement that a woman has already had a baby before she becomes a surrogate. This is the minimal protection that we should be ensuring in this bill. And it reaffirms the incredible value of motherhood, the value of having lived an experience before agreeing to go through that for someone else. And it's just trying to make sure that women understand what they are signing up for. My second great concern in this debate is around the protection of children. Under the Surrogacy Act currently, and under the bill that's before us, the life and the care of a baby is the legal right of the mother. For anyone who is following this debate, you can choose how you respond to our concerns around the protection of children. I make no allegations or generalisations about any particular person or group of people, but I'm looking at our responsibilities to protect, our duty to protect some of the most vulnerable people in our society, our children. Under surrogacy arrangements, the surrogate mother is the legal parenting unless and until a parenting order is granted. So surrogacy is effectively a form of planned adoption. Now, if we look at our modern law and our society and the role of the state in our society, there are several different circumstances in which the state is involved in decisions about the care of children. The state regulates circumstances in which adults can work and volunteer with children. This is through the Working with Children screening, which I've spoken on in detail around how at the heart of that legislation is the core principle of protection of children. The state is also involved in situations where there is adoption and foster care. Our laws and our courts watch over situations where child custody is in dispute. And our state is involved in child protection matters. Under the surrogacy law, our state is involved in the regulation of surrogacy. Under our adoption laws, criminal checks are required for those who wish to adopt children. The same applies under our laws in relation to foster care. To work with children, a criminal check is required. Now, when we come to surrogacy, the state is involved in the regulation of these arrangements. And in surrogacy, it's important to remember that there is no guarantee that one or both of the parents are biologically related to the child. The state must take its responsibility to protect children seriously. This should be a routine requirement, a basic protection that should not even be questioned. I do want to go through several cases. We cannot eliminate child abuse, but it is our duty as legislators to do everything we can, that where we can put in place protections, we do so. In 2012, an Australian couple abandoned one of two twin boys born via surrogacy in India. They returned to Australia with the baby girl, leaving behind her healthy twin brother. The couple claimed the boy would be raised by friends in India, but it was found by the Australian government that the boy would be left stateless, and there was serious concerns around the protection of that child, around child welfare, ethics, and potential trafficking, with concerns that the child had been sold. Turning more to the child protection measures that we can put in place and the requirement in the area of child protection for criminal checks. In 2011, a male homosexual couple were arrested and charged with the most heinous of child sex crimes against a boy they acquired through an international surrogacy arrangement. Records of the abuse of the boy were shown to have occurred from when the boy was just 2 weeks old until their arrest when the boy was over 6 years old. The couple had travelled with the boy, offering him for sex with other men, and images of the abuse were uploaded on an international syndicate known as the Boy Lovers Network. The couple lived in Cairns for most of the boy's life, however were arrested in America after police raided their Cairns home while they were overseas. In September 2014, a New South Wales man was charged with sexually abusing twin daughters that he fathered with a Thai surrogate mother. Police raids to his home led to charges of possessing child sexual material, pornography. When this case was brought before the courts, there were considerations of sending children back to Thailand, where their surrogate also and biological mother lived. And the organisations in Thailand, the child welfare organisations, raised serious concerns about a lack of suitable checks to protect children. And in April 2016, a man pled guilty to sexually abusing his infant twin daughters he procured through a $44,000 surrogacy arrangement using a donor egg from the Ukraine and a surrogate mother in Asia. The abuse began at 27 days old and continued to 7 months old, and this man was found to have been accessing child pornography material for decades. These are horrific cases, and while there's no guarantee that the risks could have been identified in advance, if we are not undertaking criminal checks, then it's impossible to identify risks in advance in these situations. I'd like to go on and talk about some of the concerns raised by women I've spoken to who've been surrogates in Australia. But before I do just want to address a few matters raised in the debates already this evening. I have deep compassion for anyone who wants to be a parent but can't. But the reality is, no one has a right to be a parent. Children are not objects that can be purchased. There is no right to be a child. No one is entitled to a child. A child is a human being. When we talk about children as possessions, as something that someone has a right to, that is a form of slavery. Many members have talked about children as a gift, and being a parent is a privilege. It is about far more than the wants of an adult. Parenting is a responsibility and a sacrifice, and children need more than just love. They need stability and the right to be safe and have their needs met and the right to be cared for. This bill recognises the rights of children to their genetic history at a particular age and attempts to build in methods for those children to gain access, acknowledging the importance of genetic history to a child. Another issue that has been raised, and I just would like to take a moment to address this, is that there have been a few comments and comparisons made about the law in WA that does not allow puppies to be removed from their mothers until 8 weeks of age. Now, obviously this bill is not about puppies. We all understand that. But the reason that this law is being raised as a comparison is that it is considered, the reason puppies have that protection is that it is essential for the physical, psychological and social development that they not be separated from their mother too early. Why do we not care enough about the physical, psychological and social development of our babies? We don't give them the same dignity and protection as we are providing to pets. I'll turn now to some serious concerns that have been raised from experiences that some Australian surrogates some women who've been surrogates have gone through, and some overseas examples as well. I've spoken to 2 women on the East Coast who decided to be surrogates after having their own children, who agreed to do so to help out friends and family, who went into it with their best intentions and the rosiest picture of what it would be like, and who have been absolutely exploited, abused and traumatised by the whole experience. Their concerns are that we are not putting enough protections in place to protect women and to ensure that they are not being exploited. Some of the reflections on their experience from some of the women who have been surrogates include: some of the physical impacts that are not explained properly around the medical procedures required. When I was matched with the agency, they told me that it would just be like a normal pregnancy, except that I would have to give myself shots. That was not true. I experienced subchronic hemorrhaging due to the shots and had to receive weekly blood transfusions for 2 months before giving birth. I deeply regret agreeing to use my body in this way. I was vulnerable and no one stood up for me. Another testimony. The experience was bad enough. Having somebody else try to dictate what medical procedures you should endure, how you should give birth, and what you should eat was awful. The list goes on. This affected me from the beginning of my pregnancy, yet there is still no specialised support for women going through surrogate pregnancies. I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD and underwent EMDR to alleviate some of the trauma resulting from the surrogacy. I have deep fear. The damage will never be repaired. We talk about women's rights as if they are universal, but surrogacy actually means you are choosing which women deserve more rights. That is inequality. Physically, everything went well with the pregnancy. However, it was much more difficult than I had imagined, both morally and mentally. I went through this ordeal alone, without any support from the intended parents, my family or friends. I went home empty-handed without my baby. I experienced postpartum without my baby and with my milk coming in. It was as if my body was mourning. It was as if the baby had died. These traumatic experiences expose some of the real risks and the lived experiences that are negative. And I understand that many stories have been shared about the pain and suffering that many people are experiencing. We need to make sure that we do what we can to make sure that women are not exploited, they're not taken advantage of. If they are financially vulnerable, if they're emotionally vulnerable, if they feel pressured by family and friends to undergo procedures that they may not be comfortable with. The protections in our existing law are being removed without any reasonable explanation of why. There are also concerns from many different advocacy bodies who've not been consulted during this process, who feel like their views have been ignored. From the Western Australian Women's Action Alliance. Women's groups, independent experts and feminist advocates were systematically excluded from consultation. Excluding women's rights organisations from meaningful consultation breaches Australia's obligation under the Convention Against CEDAW's Convention Article 7 and leads to bad law. When women are genuinely consulted, exploitation risks are surfaced early and harmful provisions are avoided. All the complexity dissolves when parliaments prohibit surrogacy, but even when we are looking at the surrogacy arrangements we have, we need to make sure that adequate protections are put in place. Women's Forum Australia have concerns that an 18-year-old who has never given birth and is barely an adult cannot be expected to comprehend the profound physical, emotional and psychological implications of pregnancy and relinquishing a child, not to mention the increased risks of health risks for surrogate women. At its core, this bill undermines the rights of women and children, making it easier to exploit and commodify them, and opens them up to grave harm. We've had concerns raised by the Western Australian adoptees who have asked that members consider the profound impact of breaking a bond between mother and child, and considering that the laws before us today are seeking to expand this, remove barriers, make it more common, without ensuring that protections are put in place for the women and children who are most vulnerable in these situations. I will also specifically address some of the comments made by the Honourable Dan Caddy earlier today, who called it a hypocrisy for people who are pro-life to not want single people to have children through surrogacy, and that he sees this as an attack on single parents. I'd like to say that this is not an attack on single parents at all. I have deep admiration for single parents. Parenting as a team with my husband is hard enough and challenging enough. I cannot imagine how difficult it could be to do it alone. The desire to see children raised by more than one person as their parent is looking to a lot of the research around what is the most beneficial circumstances in which a child can flourish. And there's a lot of research on that from around the world. Before I go on to listing and summarising the key concerns that have been raised in this debate tonight, I would just like to really reiterate that because of all of the concerns raised about lack of consultation, the concerns raised around removal of important protections.
Order, member. Noting the time, I'm required to interrupt debate for members' statements.
I rise to resume my comments from earlier on in this debate about the Assisted Reproductive Technology and Surrogacy Bill 2025. And today, Acting President, I call on all members to consider supporting the need for a committee inquiry into this bill. I've already spoken about the complexities of this bill and the significant ethical issues that we are considering today. Specifically, there are 3 areas of law being combined into one bill: assisted reproductive technology, surrogacy, and posthumous removal of gametes. As a young woman, the changes to our laws around surrogacy are of a particular concern to me. And when it comes to surrogacy, as we've been hearing about over the past few days, there are 3 main groups of people who have a significant interest in this debate: the intended parents, the surrogate mothers, and the children. As my first participation in a conscience debate, it is wonderful to be able to see our democracy in action, to be in a chamber with 37 members of parliament who come from all different backgrounds, have their own views and their own concerns, things they are passionate about, and we have the opportunity to work together to make sure that we can pass the best laws possible for the sake of our state. I acknowledge the contributions of all members who've already spoken on this debate, and I particularly acknowledge those who've had the courage to speak up about very personal situations. I particularly would like to note the comments of the Honourable Julie Freeman, who is one of the few who so far has touched on the various competing interests of the 3 different groups of people who are most affected by the surrogacy elements of this bill. But the reality is that in a lot of ways, those interests are not incompatible in terms of what we are passing today and over the next weeks. We do not need to disregard the needs of vulnerable people when considering an expansion of access to surrogacy. Whether or not this place determines to expand access to surrogacy for different intended parents does not mean that we should not be concerned about reducing exploitation of women and protecting children. If anything, the fact that surrogacy could become more common after the passing of this bill means that we should be even more concerned about making sure that appropriate protections are in place to protect the most vulnerable in our society. This bill, in its current form, fails to do that, and that is why there is a need for it to be considered by a committee. One of the major concerns that I've raised around changes in this law is in the area of the current law says that a woman cannot be a surrogate unless she's at least 25 years of age and she's already had a baby. When we look at the age of a surrogate and the fact that this bill says it's fine to reduce that age down to 18, I ask, what do we aspire for in our society? Do we really think that there is a pressing need, that there is an urgent reason why we need to risk the exploitation of vulnerable young women by decreasing this age? No good reason has been provided. And the bad reasons for doing this I will illustrate in 2 examples. Because young women, high school students, can potentially face exploitation and coercion by decreasing the age to 18. A young woman may be in a situation of financial vulnerability, struggling to support herself, approached with a suggestion that she could assist someone to have a baby via surrogacy, and during that time receive support financially. Now, we know that commercial surrogacy is illegal, but it's not enforced and it's not monitored. The potential negative mental harm that could be suffered by women being taken advantage of in these situations is of great concern. We also have situations where women may be emotionally vulnerable and may feel pressured to enter into a surrogacy arrangement to help out someone that they dearly love, but who are not in a situation where they can fully comprehend the impact it will have on their life. These risks are real and could be very easily addressed. In addition, the requirement being removed that a woman has already given birth to a baby also has not been given any good reason as to why this change is required. And the bad reasons for changing this protection, removing this, are the risks of physical, emotional and psychological harm, which I went through in a large amount of detail in my previous remarks. Again, what are we working towards? What do we aspire for? Do we want the first experience of motherhood for women to be one where they are giving away their baby, when they do not have the prior experience to know what that mother-child bond really feels like? My second area of great concern is around the protection of our children. This bill fails our kids because there is no requirement that anyone involved in this process undergoes a criminal check. We cannot prevent child abuse, but why won't we at least try? Why would any of us choose to turn a blind eye to the risks that are here? There is no good reason not to require criminal checks. It is standard practice. It is a basic requirement. When we look at state involvement in parenting arrangements, in parenting situations, we are duty-bound and honour-bound to do everything we can to protect children. In the adoption system, criminal checks are standard. In the foster system, criminal checks are standard. And we are talking about a situation where a child may be placed with parents who have no biological connection to them. No one here is attacking the good people who open their homes to kids in need through adoption and foster care. No one here is attacking individual people or groups of people by calling for criminal checks. The only people we are attacking is those who wish to abuse children. And I have gone through cases in my earlier remarks of pedophiles accessing children through surrogacy and committing heinous crimes, heinous abuse against them. We cannot eliminate these situations, but why won't we at least try? This bill fails our kids, and a simple change could result in reducing child sexual abuse. This bill should be considered by a committee. There are broader concerns that this bill raises that have also not been addressed. And we really have not had the time to seriously consider the issues around commercial surrogacy. Our Australian federal government website on surrogacy clearly outlines why commercial surrogacy is unacceptable, because it can lead to exploitation of women and children. Both our Australian Federal Parliament and the United Nations have published many reports on the issues, concerns and human rights risks that have arisen from commercial surrogacy. And the reality is that commercial surrogacy, while illegal, is not being enforced. Those laws are not being enforced under our current law. They will not be adequately enforced under our bill before us today if it's passed in its current form. And we should be considering greater protections to ensure that commercial surrogacy is not occurring, to ensure that laws against commercial surrogacy are enforced to try and prevent the exploitation of women and children. And specific issues that have been raised in this specifically refer to human trafficking that happens overseas, children left parentless and sometimes stateless, parents also discovering errors in which material has been used and experiencing difficulties with laws around the statehood of their children. Another serious ethical consideration that we have before us in the bill today that has not been debated in detail to any degree is around the posthumous removal of gametes. This is a major ethical consideration and a huge change to our law. But people don't know that it's in the bill. The average person you talk to has no idea that this significant issue, this significant ethical consideration, that the law is being changed in this space. Now, there's not much research in this space, but there is some from the Ethics Committee of the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, who found that in various studies, about half the population supported the idea of posthumous removal of gametes, but of those in support, the majority, a significant majority, believe that the posthumous use of gametes is permissible only with prior informed consent. This issue has not been debated, it hasn't been discussed. We really do not have enough information to go and pass such sweeping changes. In the limited time remaining, I will quickly run through all the concerns that have been raised about the bill before us. And for the following reasons, Acting President, I urge members to support the referral of this bill to a committee for inquiry. The complexity of the law justifies a referral. The fact that both previous bills relating to surrogacy that have come before the West Australian Parliament have been to a committee justifies a referral. The fact that the Australian Law Reform Commission right now is in the middle of a major review of surrogacy provisions around the whole country justifies referral of this to a committee inquiry. This provision, this bill before us, has a complete upheaval of the approval system, completely replacing the Reproductive Technology Council with a completely different body, with a completely different function. The oversight provisions are being removed. The law fails to stop commercial surrogacy. It fails to make it properly enforceable. There's inadequate consideration of the concerns raised by surrogates around the non-disclosure agreement requirements. The bill before us allows advertising for surrogates. It ignores the lived experiences and serious concerns raised by those who've experienced surrogacy and forced adoption. It fails to protect our women. It removes the protection of having had a baby before becoming a surrogate. It lowers the age from 25 to 18. There is no good reason that has been given for these. It doesn't put an upper age limit on who intended parents can be. And most critically, it fails to protect our children from predators. I'd like to give a voice to a survivor of forced adoption who has raised significant concerns around surrogacy, who has said that adoptees are survivors of the permanent consequences of this pre-verbal mother rupture, along with the erasure of our real identity and genealogical bewilderment. Much of the lived experience of adoptees and those born to surrogate mothers is disenfranchised by a society that refuses to believe there is absolutely no consequence to permanently removing newborns from their mothers. Acting President, for these reasons, all of these reasons that I've outlined today, I respectfully ask all members to seriously consider supporting a referral of this bill to committee. And I move without notice that the Assisted Reproductive Technology and Surrogacy Bill 2025 be discharged and referred to the Standing Committee on Legislation for consideration and report.